reason we lost your sound there, so, and I think you lost our sound. So the first,
okay, we're here. Yep.
Schools are, well, what you're finding is that schools are a relatively boring place for children nowadays in terms of their ability to engage in learning, and the whole paradigm shifted there. So I was just wondering if you could unpick that a little bit for people. So this is the pre-COVID situation, and then we'll get into COVID, then we'll get into what we can do about it.
Yeah, we have, close to practice for last 20 years when we started into the policy work in Ontario in 2003. So I would say that there was no doubt, and in fact, we documented quite a bit. I did a book called, the last book I did is called The Devil is in the Details. And chapter 1 is really paragraph and after paragraph showing that engagement of students and of teachers has been declining for the last 20 years in schooling. And that there's alienation, boring, various degrees of that. And there's only about 1 in 5 students that are really connected, and they might not even be going in the right direction. So without being overly critical, I think if you take the climate catastrophe, the growing and galloping inequality and the boredom of school, that's pre-COVID. And so it wasn't working. And then I think, it's not even a criticism, it's just that that's the way it was. We wanted to change it, we're changing with deep learning. But then COVID blew it out of the water and exposed it even more. And so we can start into COVID, but it was already taking a decaying system and opening it up for everybody to see in a dramatic, traumatized way for many people.
Great, so thank you. So that's coming from the research, that's coming from the experience, and I think that relates to the Jenkins curve as well.
Yeah.
And it's been really fascinating watching as a lot of children have become disengaged or partially disengaged during this period, which we'll get into in more detail. But some have really come on during this period. Probably about 20% have actually preferred learning in this format.
Yeah, we've been tracking it ourselves with our own research, but also other people who have been actually really close to it, tapping it. So there's several levels you can look at it. One is the time of the year that it happened, March, April, May. In some ways that was, I guess I want to say, those of us who don't believe in the value of testing the way it's currently organized, that there's a lot of time that would have been wasted anyways on those months. So I don't feel too badly about the lost time per se. But when you look at the subgroups, and we have found this as others have had, and the way I put it is, if I take the 80% of the students that were disengaged, that's the way I think about it, 40% of those were really alienated. So they were inequity, not doing well, not alienated is the word. And the another 40% were not interested. So they weren't really engaged in schooling. And they're the ones that, if I take the 40% alienated and another 40%, if I got the figures right, that are didn't like school anyways, but like learning, they flourished actually in this time. They've had the flexible time. We know what this looks like. They're doing good things. They're actually making contributions. And then the other 20%, I'm going to use a Canadian phrase, were beavering away in the COVID, saying, oh, how do I keep up? I want to go to university. And so they were that. So those three groups, which I'll call alienating, loving the freedom as the second group, and beavering away as the third group, have that mixture. And I really think the first group, the 40% that were alienated, they are suffering the most because there's no support system alternative to the school, which wasn't working for them. But then they're also got all kinds of societal issues, family issues, contextual issues, and they're really the ones that we're going to see suffer the most. They're already suffering with an inequitable system, and now we have a COVID period, which paying attention and supporting them is a big challenge, and that's left business on left.
Okay, well, without wanting to get like too overtly political about this, obviously the English government have had a certain response, which is that all children will be back in, possibly in rows to ensure social or at least physical distancing, and use of tuition and summer schools to do catch up. So it seems like the major emphasis there seems to be on this learning loss. You know, what's your feeling on that?
Well, my feeling is the learning was bad to begin with, and why double dose it now under worse conditions? So I think it's going to be a colossal failure. that approach. There's no that response is a quantitative response, not a qualitative one. It's saying if we can get people back in and they're there physically, and it looks like learning is going on, but the only indicator is only because they're there. It's going to go nowhere. It's going to be worse than before. It's just going to be double alienation, I guess. Well, I don't know what the word would be. You have to have good learning to take advantage of the next phase. Good ideas, and we can talk about that later. We think we have some that we've developed and are implementing now, but the English response, all children back in, is an incredibly dangerous move.
Okay, well, thank you. That's we heard it here first. So we've kind of looked at the number one fault line operating in the current education system, which is the learning isn't working for the learners. Are there any other ones that you see as being kind of quite important within this process that are kind of restricting us?
Well, it's the same in a sense for teachers. If it's not working for students, it means it's not working for teachers. It doesn't mean that teachers are the cause of the student failure. Some of it might be, but it really isn't working for teachers. As you know, Andy Hargraves and I individually together have been working with the teaching profession for the last 20 years or more. And we do have some good images of what effective professionalism is now. We can get into those in detail if you want. But I think I'd have to say that the teaching profession, in one way, is heroic, because they're first responders to this crisis, and the moral purpose and the willingness as first responders to give up your own being to help others. There's a lot of that going on now. So the heroism of that kind of response has been incredible, but that can't last. I mean, that's a temporary system, and we have to land, I'm going to say, with a better sense of professionalism than we had before COVID.
Okay, so let's move on to the leadership then, because obviously this is where your reputation is well formed and stuff like that. Within the nuances, what do you feel that is going to be necessary for leaders to do differently? Because I'm seeing a lot of leaders putting in incredible amounts of time trying to hold this together, trying to prepare for any number of potential outcomes.
Yeah, I think there's two ways I want to talk about leadership. One is what we think of implications for formal leaders, school heads and school principals in North America, and people at the district or LEA level, but then also the proliferation of leadership, the democratization of leadership. That's the second one. So in the first one, in the book Nuance, I have 10 case studies, but also a lot of ideas that basically shows, because we're looking at the real work. And in fact, in your in England, one of the best cases is Ben Adlard School, it's called, in Lincolnshire, that Marie Claire Bretherton came in as principal, and this was a year and a half ago or so, and with incredible sophistication of leadership, what we call joint determination, going into a situation that wasn't working and saying, we're going to make this work, and all of you, I'm not going to sack anybody. All of you are going to be part of the solution. So the leadership that I'm able to document now, I call it joint determination. Mary Parker Follett in 1920s called it unity of purpose, but it's a unity of purpose is a process where the leader and the people that are in the school, especially teachers, are co-determining the solution, which means they have to go back and forth and pool the ideas, and the leader self, described it this way, has to be a learner and an apprentice at the same time. They have some things to offer, and but that won't carry the day. The apprentice is, what can I learn from this culture? How can I understand this culture? So these kind of leaders I'm talking about get below the surface. Another good way of saying it is that they are experts. They become experts in contextual literacy, a phrase I don't use that often, but it's an accurate one. Contextual literacy is understanding your context. And another good way of saying it as an insight is that every time you move into a new position or situation as a leader, you become automatically de-skilled at the beginning, because you can't know that culture yet. And you've got skills that to offer to it, but you've got to learn a lot. So there's a whole bunch of revamping of leaders that they have to be learners, leaders in that kind of cumulative sequence. And then I think the other, what I call the democratization of leadership, is that we are finding in our deep learning work is that teachers, individually and collectively, are leaders about the solution. That students, and this is the hidden gem in some ways, become change makers. And our book is called, the deep learning book is called Engage the World, Change the World, because now we see students who, under the right conditions, have more agency is a word I don't like that much, but it's like that, except it's co-development with other students and teachers. And not only does it, I mean, here's, I'm sorry to talk so long at the first bit of questions, but there's a big distinction here, which is that ironically, traditional schooling with its emphasis on academics per se is not very motivating for the students I'm talking about, generally speaking. That is to say, a student doesn't light up because there's a great science lesson. I mean, they might, but not the first day. What is important for students to get into learning is purpose, meaning, belongingness, teamwork, an opportunity to contribute to the world. And then the academic subjects are all within that and part of that. That's our deep learning model. So what I see as a really major shift from the student on the, which some people have called the grammar of schooling, on the receiving end of knowledge being dished out to them, to a proactive co-learner with other students and with teachers. I mean, this model has been around in small pockets for a long time, but now I'm going to say we are helping to make it flourish across a lot of the system, where we could talk about system change, but our work is always about system change. How does the whole system change? And we can delve into that question of how do you get at system change.
Well, I was going to start with just at a school-based level, if that's okay, and then we can go up
that's
to
fine,
system,
yeah.
and then back down to individual classrooms, which would be really neat, and then into the learners themselves. So if we just start at a whole school level, you know, I like this kind of construct of openness. I think in some ways Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindsets is probably what you maybe find easier to be open mindsets. So if I'm a leader tomorrow, can you give us a couple of examples from where in the world you've seen a leader go in and say, yeah, this is how we're going, and this is how I'm going to open myself up to it?
Well, the 8-page case study in Nuance from Marie-Claire Blatherton, the Ben Adler one, is absolutely crystal clear. It's complex because the change was deep. That was a school that was on the special measures for eons and was an absolute hellhole to teach in, I think. And that's what that was the starting point. And the first week that Marie-Claire went in as a leader, several teachers took her aside, so to speak, and said, whatever you've used in other systems, in other schools to get success, it won't work here. So don't even think about it. So that's how she started. And then you see in those 10 pages that I have the turnaround and the success within 24 months. So there's a leader who doesn't save the day because she's got the solution the moment she walks in the door. She's got the approach to the solution, which she knows is start small or start slow to go fast. Get to understand a little bit of the culture. Yeah, it doesn't work, but I want to understand what it looks like, why it stays that way. Get some glimpses of successes where you get 2 or more teachers working together, and the first time they see the advantage of working together and they get results. And that slowly, and then it starts to what we call go slow to go fast. It starts to have a contagion effect. This is all within 24 months. So I think that that is the way, and within those individual schools, you can turn around the worst possible school in a fairly short period of time with an approach like that. And I have to say, it's crystal clear to me, at least, and we described it. It's not idiosyncratic to her personality. It's the nature of leadership that carries the day, and co-leadership, developing co-leadership among teachers within the school. There are probably 32 teachers in that school.
So it's interesting. I always think there's only 4 things you can really play with in education. I'm gonna you can argue with me here. And the first one's behaviour, the second one's probably curriculum, the third one's the quality of the teaching model, and then the fourth one maybe is the quality of the learning model. That's kind of the way I'd seen it. And I was looking at Chris Day's research paper in 2016, and when you dig underneath it and look at the case studies, virtually every leader, and it's mainly in England, but also includes Scotland and Wales, starts with discipline and behaviour. And you find a very similar pattern in teaching as well. And it's almost like that one, we don't really have much of a proven effect. However, if you go down to the learning end, it's quite dramatically different. And I guess that start with your own learning then first.
Yeah, yeah. And I think if it's, if the situation is so bad, you do have to start with behavior, because that ruins everything or affects everything else. And I think that's where those came from. But quite often, um, if you had the case study I just mentioned a few minutes ago, Ben Adlard, it was starting with behavior change among students and staff for that matter. But it wasn't really kind of here's the tough love. It wasn't like that. It was more, yeah, this is a stepping stone to learning, and I prefer learning as the driver, and that learning is that you have to build trust with teachers and students in the best possible way, and and so I don't think it's a recipe 1, 2, 3, 4, but I do think it is about those how those things how the chemistry of that works, and it's about creating a culture of learning. And it's just as I said, you have to have good ideas, but you also have to be a learner to fit with that particular situation, understand the culture, change the culture, build it from there.
Okay, great. Gets off to a good start. So we've got a good macro picture now. We're looking at what leaders can do. Now, you talked about 3 distinctive phases of response, which I think is very useful for leaders and people engaging with school at the moment, in terms of the disruption phase, which obviously we've been going through. And looking at what's happening in Melbourne right now, it's likely that we'll go through it again. Then the second phase, this kind of transitioning phase, and then the third phase, the kind of reimagining. Which is where we start. Can you elucidate more on those and open those ones up a little bit for us?
Yeah, I mean they're in the paper, the reimagining paper laid out. We got them from the field, so to speak, and I would say one overall thing that the phases, which is as you said, the disruption, the transition, the reimagining flow. It's not going to happen as fast as some people thought it might. That the timeline for this is now, we are thinking at least 12 more months, probably 18. I mean, it will never settle down overnight, but the flow has to be towards settling. And I think we're in for another 18 months of disturbance, more disruption, and especially as some of the solutions become ham-handed. Their solutions, is like the famous phrase, the helping hand strikes again. So that the solutions actually are worse than the problem sometimes. So I do think there's a big churn here, and that we need to. Our work is to equip teachers and principals and students with the ability to make their way through a highly complex and dangerous set of circumstances. The silver lining in it is there's more room for maneuver now, though, because the system can't control itself. And the advantage to that is you can slice into it in ways that can create really positive sub-pockets. And that's what the best ones are doing. And that's what we have to learn from. How do you create a sub-pocket of positive learning and well-being in a situation that's overall disruptive, but it doesn't, within disruption, there can be more creativity, as we know, than if it was just business as usual. So I don't mind it. I take it as a given, and I think a lot of us are putting our energy into the mobilization of students, parents, and teachers to take advantage of the disruption and to take advantage of the good ideas that we know work even within these circumstances.
Fabulous. So in terms of that, how would I know as a school leader which stage I'm at in terms of what I'm seeing? Because I think it's quite easy to perceive that you're at one stage, but how do you really know that that's the stage you're at?
Well, it's as you implied before, it's an interaction, not just what I can do as a leader, but what the system is lobbing at me, the decisions that are made centrally, and so those are changing. Every week there's doubling back or jumping ahead or whatever. It's absolutely an unstable environment on the intervention side. So I think that what leaders need to do, and we've always advocated this, but now this makes it much more visible, is they need to be inside learning, as I said, about the context. Now this includes the external context, policies from the government, the way that the virus is spreading or not. So yeah, they need to be aware of that. But then the two characteristics I would say that they need is decisiveness and empathy, or the other way around, empathy and decisiveness. So the big breakthrough here is going to be the capacity for leaders to be in the context so much that they with their empathy, is the way I would put it, is that they really are knowing and understanding what makes their context tick or not. So that the empathy of the empathy that comes from the immersion as a learner equips a leader to be decisive about this and that, and that's where they can find their decisions. They won't find decisiveness or the right kind of decisiveness from external policy. They'll find it from their own ingenuity and their work with the people that are in that system, teachers and students and parents for that matter.
Okay, cool. So someone's asking about what the reimagining stage, which is where we're going to definitely be traveling to anyway, because that one fits in with the work. But just before we get that, we're talking about the decisiveness. Now, what we're finding is that the capacity within leadership obviously has been eaten up by continual policy changes and movements and preparations and stuff like that. So people are getting tired. It's getting towards the end of the school year. How do you find the space then to be able to, develop that decisiveness and really get to where your own space is?
Well, we have, and I've said this in nuance as well, is that when we think of policy, first let me start one step back. In almost all of our work, we've found that the best ideas that we find come from, 80% of the best ideas come from leading practitioners. I'm talking about students, teachers, parents, as well as educators. And therefore, the best ideas are there in the grassroots. And so think of it as bottom up or whatever. And because we always do things with systems and cooperation, we discover those insights. Some of them we might be prompting, others they might be our ideas, but they come out as more precisely when good leaders recognize them and run with them. So this means that I value more than any of the levels the potential of the bottom. And that then the implication of that, and we've said it this way, and I don't mean it so rebelliously, is that your job at the school level is not to implement government policy just because it's policy. Your job is to exploit policy for learning and well-being. And if that's the mindset we can establish, and that's in fact what better leaders do, they don't literally say, "Oh, I better implement this," or unless they proactively say, "We know where we're going. We're getting better and better. We're thinking together. We have some solutions, and I'm going to take into account policy, and I'm going to find some of those policies, there are resources and ideas I can use proactively for my system." So the decisiveness is to take more control and get out of the mindset that you're at the mercy of policy. You're not at the mercy of policy. You can be. We've been not implementing policy for eons, right? Over the last 40 years. So we're good at not implementing policy. That's a given. But what you have to do is get better at under these conditions. And the disruption, you could say, well, that makes it much harder. But I'm thinking it makes it much easier. When it's disruptive, there's more opportunities to get in there, niche and development, and you're not being distracted by tests and other things that were really consequential when they happen. But now there's more looseness in the system, and the policies that are coming at us about getting back to school, they actually do require a lot of maintenance attention, because they put students in jeopardy, and there's putting out fires is, I guess, one way of putting it. So I don't deny that those distractions, you have to deal with them, they're essential. But I go again to what's the learning here, well-being and learning, going together. We say getting good at learning and good at life. Those are the twin goals of deep learning. And we know now some of the new things that contribute to that integration, that development. So we're I think, on the right track that way.
Would it be useful, I think, just for the audience, just to open up what the deep learner profile is, so people can see it, and you can just briefly talk through in this context, because I think that's a very good frame for picking it up on.
Yeah. Do you want to put the slide of and again, these want to be clear here that we've developed these with schools and school systems in 8 countries since 2014, 2015. So they're not us sitting in the lab coming up with this and saying, let's implement it. They're coming from the partnership. And so the combination of things here is, one is these 6 C's. You can argue, well, there should be a 7th C, whatever. But these actually, the way, because we have tools for them, that we put them into practice. We worked the last 2 days remotely with teams from 50 schools in a school district. These are teams implementing this work. So the core of deep learning is the 6 C's. It requires a long time to kind of open this up, because these actually integrate the learning goals and the social emotional competencies. They're within this character and citizenship, and several of the others have a lot of the social emotional. So we think we have a combined curriculum that deals with academics and deals with the C's. We have for the last 2 years, joining us has been Jean Clinton, who's a neuroscientist, a child psychiatrist in Toronto area, and she's a full member of our work using neuroscience and confirming with us. And she basically concluded that the 6 C's, and the way I'm using her language here, immunizes students from further deterioration if they're in a bad situation. In other words, that's the power of them. So that's the core of it. The question is, what do you need to do to surround it, to implement it? And if you move to the model, the model that shows the full model, this is one step more. Yeah. Go back to the previous one. Sorry, Stephen.
That's right.
Just back one or two now. Yeah, back one more. So so we've got the 6 C's, and that's the little deep learning circle in the middle of that. And then we've tried to be comprehensive about the learning design that would need to surround the implementation of this. So this learning design, all of this has tools and support system and videos and whatever, and we build it according to the local system. But this includes the pedagogy, the nature of good learning. It includes partnerships with students, teachers, and the community. It includes changing the learning environment so that it's not so rigid. And it includes leveraging digital, which is the technology thing I'm glad to come back to later. So those, if you take the 6 C's and these 4 designs and you think of these co-developing, that's where we're going. And then one last point, the next slide, is the big picture. It looks complicated, and it is, but we try to keep to a small number of key things. So there you see the 6 C's. There you see the 4 pieces surrounding them. And then you get into what we might call the infrastructure, is school culture, district or LEA culture, and policy, which is the third one, all for us in the service of equity and engaging the world. So that is the model, and it's one that we not only co-developed it, but we've enabled it to come alive in practice. And so we were doing this before COVID. And a rather interesting spin-off here is that COVID has produced more interest in our model of deep learning, that is actual interest of doing it, in the last 4 months than in the previous 24 months. Even though there's a lot of interest, there's much more now. So we're very busy actually putting it into place in California, in Newfoundland and Labrador in Canada, several other districts, and in Australia, New Zealand, Uruguay, other parts of Latin America. So it's a big breakthrough, and COVID has opened the door for it.
Nice. I'm just wondering, why do you think the reason is there's so much resistance to this kind of model? Going back to Matthew Lippman's philosophy for children or philosophy for communities, it's got a lot of tie-in with there. Mike Tomlinson did a curriculum review around 2000 here, and it put very much this kind of model at the center of it. And yet, time after time, it seems to get rejected at the top end of the decision-making tree, if you like.
Yeah, I think actually we did an interesting thing very recently, or is involved in one. There's a journal called the American Journal of Education, AJE, and Jal Mehta, his name is, who's a Harvard professor, and Sarah Fine, They had just finished a book last year called In Search of Deep Learning. And it's a great book. It actually won the Grammar Award. It was so good. And what they had gone out and looked for deep learning in places, this is in schools in the U.S. that claimed to be doing deep learning. And so they went out, they did field work, etc. And they were very disappointed because they found hardly any examples of it, even in the schools that were claiming it. So they said, in search of deep learning. They did find some things in what they call the periphery, after school programs, theater groups and things like that, the odd classroom. So I'm warming up to your question, by the way. And then what they did for HKA, they were invited to be co-editors of a special issue. The special issue was a call for papers of research-based focus on schools that had changed the grammar of schooling. The phrase "the grammar of schooling" was made famous by Tyack and Cuban and a couple of others in 1970s. And what they basically said is the grammar of schooling hasn't changed for us at the last century, from in there 1975 to 1865, and now we have another 25 years. The grammar of schooling is the way the grades are organized, the teacher dominance of knowledge transmission, and all the way that learning is. So they said we've got bad grammar, and that's why it's not working. And I'm going to say that's why more and more students are alienated. So the discouraging thing in this is they did publish 5 papers, and they asked me and Larry Cuban, who was one of the co-authors of the original grammar, to comment on them separately. We did that. That issue is coming out in about 3 weeks, and it's great, a great issue. I love it. And what we found was in the 5 cases of purported success, that is, they're trying it, 4 of the 5 went back to the old grammar, like right away, like within the first year. Wow. The 5th one went ahead, but there were only 1 school, like an island, not the district and not the external environment. So I think this is the answer to your question. I think is it's hard to. It requires new work and new cultures for teachers to work this way. Even though we can describe it now, even though we can, but it's not easy to do. So here you have the teacher in the school stuck in the old culture. And in Thomas Kuhn's The Structure of Scientific Revolution that he wrote in 1962, he said, in order for a paradigm to change, you need 2 things. One is that the current paradigm, he says, his phrase was cataclysmically bad. So the current paradigm is bad. He said, but you need an alternative one that's better, potentially better. And if you just have the badness, you won't get to the potential. So that's the space we're working in now. I think the answer is it's very hard to get the foot in the door around this new culture. But when you do, it takes off like positive contagion fast. So it's a hard thing at the beginning. And I'm going to say it this way too, that the problem is equally at the school level and at the policy level. It's not just that the policies are wrong. It's that the culture of the school level is also wrong. And I don't blame the policy as the full problem of that. And there've been, as you know, examples of changing the culture of, the work that Tim Brickhouse did, Steve Munby, a lot of the people that were in those, they were changing systems, LEAs or academies of schools, whatever. We can get to those in a moment as to why they're not working well enough. But they actually tried to make those changes. And where the failure is the failure to combine 2 things: the energy at the local level to keep going and spreading it, to put the pressure upward on policy, and then the lack of attention of policy to change the frame that would enable these things to happen. Those 2 things are conspiring for the status quo.
So just within that, we've obviously got quite a movement towards evidence-based education. We've got the Education Endowment Foundation operating here, where they are examining these things. And certainly I remember the early trial of P4C came through having quite marginal effects, but it was only when they started to properly unpick the qualitative elements behind it that suddenly they went, hang on, this is doing something different. And then they understand a bit more about the metacognition. So I'm just wondering how because it is a bit of a winning game there for certain. If you're judging everything on English and maths scores, which seems to be predominant, there's a huge predomination on that one, and things that directly affect those are obviously going to score higher, rather than stuff that takes a much more rounded view. So how do you get past that element if they're going to dominate, and they've got the dominance of the minister's ears at this point in time?
I think the short answer is rebellion. That is not the evidence-based movement is it's wrong evidence. That's what we're talking about. Evidence-based around doing well, and we don't. In our deep learning, students do better on literacy and math because there's more motivation to learn and it's more integrated. So it's not like you throw those out. It's that you're not preoccupied with these slices of measures that distort the learning so much so that engagement goes down. And so I think that that these right now in some, and I see cracks in this because we work in our system model is local, LEA, national or state, and that we see definitely dissatisfaction at the local level pushing upward and sideways within the local. Right. We see, at least in North America, some districts, many districts that are changing. Ottawa Catholic District, 83 schools, the whole thing has changed over to what I'm talking about in the space of about 2 years. And it's up and going crazy well. So now we see and leadership in the middle. So we've had that. In some ways, and I'm not close enough to England now, but I remember when I was doing workshops there every May for at least 2 to 3 weeks. So we see all kinds of things that included, incidentally, Wales and Northern Ireland and Scotland. But I remember then there were great leaders at the LEA level. Steve Munby at Knowsley, Tim Brickhouse and a couple of places, the London Challenge. So a lot of things. But somehow in the movement towards academies, you lost the kind of a good idea at the time, schools from each other, but it actually created a power system that was not all that conducive to the spread of the cultures that I'm talking about. I don't have a good unpacking of that. I just know that it's wrong. It's wrong because we know that the collaboration that works is not a highly competitive collaboration. It's a collaboration where you can be autonomous and contributing to the system back and forth that way. And in the case of England, I think it's by a series of very bad, let's say, policies at the government level and the ministers of education. All of that has been inhibiting factor for at least the last decade.
Yeah, well. Okay, we'll leave the policy side of England across, and let's get back to if I'm in school now, which many of these people are, and they're wondering how do they get started? I mean, how do they join in with you guys? What steps would you say take first?
Well, in the Education Reimagined report, which is 34 pages long, it's not a big tome. There are a bit different. There are ideas, but there are also tools. There's a tool for getting back to school that has a checklist of 30 items or something like that. So we provided, even for people not working with us, we've said, okay, here's how you can think about it. And I keep going back to the empathy plus decisiveness after you've got some good ideas through your empathy and interaction. So we have checklists and tools, and I have a lot of actually faith now in the tools we're producing to guideline. We used to joke about tools. You probably recall, a fool with a tool is still a fool, and so you need the mindset and the tool. So we're working on the mindset. We want to also provide the tools because they're the mechanisms of action. And so I think we have those, and people can get self-starts. I get a lot of comments from individual school principals somewhere in Western Australia or any number of places who write to me and say, what you've just said is what we're doing, and it's working. I was glad to see the reasons and the rationale more clearly stated, because now I know what's working, because we knew that, but now we have a way of talking about it. So I think there's a lot of examples of individuals who can do what I'm talking about, from using our work and work like it and putting it into practice and working on their own autonomy. We have the phrase we use is connected autonomy, which is a great phrase I think, because it recognizes that if you are connected, you're better off when you're autonomous, because you're learning, you're contributing the connection, you're learning from it. So we have a lot of pockets of those. People are fed up with the old way. COVID is making them really fed up with additional wrong moves. So I think we'll get through this period, and out of this, there will be, I think, something better, because it is so bad and so aggravated now. But those who want it better can get a head start by starting to do it. And they will find kindred spirits linking at that level. Then if they want to go all the way, so to speak, the deep learning model we have is highly operational, highly supported. You just have to connect to us. We like to work with more than one school at a time, because we want the rub-off effect. And that it's there to be had right now. And I hope in the next 24 months that we will gain on this, and it will show up in a different quality of leaders and a different policies emerging from this. A lot of entities now, including OECD, are questioning the way that testing has evolved to its current state as one that is not working for anyone. Even those at the top of the league tables, the price of it is massive anxiety and stress and after hours programs, anything to be at the top. I'm talking about Shanghai and even South Korea as a problem where they've overemphasized the drudgery of getting at the top of the league tables, and all they end up with is a top score, a bad human. And I don't mean a mean human. I just mean one that's stressed out.
Cool. So we'll put up all the links for this anyway, and I know there's fantastic audit tools. There's all sorts of tools within those to get people going, and we've got the connections there straight away. So that's great. Someone's asking about the blended learning thing. So I think it's a good time to move on to technology, because we've mentioned that we'll get onto this one early. We're seeing how it's used now. I think you're one of the people who's definitely said that it's not being used effectively. I know that the research is showing very much that as well. So I'm just wondering how. Oh, thanks, Dawn, for putting that link up to the paper. That's very helpful for everyone. Mm-hmm. So how would you see technology playing out usefully as opposed to as a kind of substitution for textbooks?
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the model that the more succinct version now that I have has only three things in it: technology, pedagogy, well-being is the second thing. And the third thing I call systemness, paying attention to how the system can be that. So if you think of technology, there's certain basic things that need to be there as a foundation. You know this from the kind of work we're doing right now face-to-face, is you need access to quality devices, quality connectivity, and great platforms. You need those three things as a foundation. But then you have to this is where the worry comes in. We're now talking about looking at some systems in Latin America. The problem we made, and I made this point in 2011, was that technology is a wrong driver, but it's not a bad accelerator. So if you load up on the technology as the solution, the delivery solution, you will make matters worse, because it leaves out the pedagogy too much, or it puts pedagogy into a narrow, driven way. So I think that this is and another thing we're observing, I think, empirically, and to put it dramatically, is this way: we have overestimated the power of artificial technology, artificial intelligence, and machines. We've overestimated machines, and we've underestimated the power of human and social intelligence. That's the twin point. And the solution is not to have technology missing. And for one thing, it won't be, because the markets and capitalism favors it. But if you start to build up what I call the learning and the well-being part, which is the essence of our deep learning, and you have the technology, remember in our model, leveraging digital is one of our pieces of the learning design, and those two comes in, then it's the humans that are thriving with their strategy and their ideas, and they all become natural learners of technology in that. So it's and then the systemness for us is to make sure, and I'm thinking of Uruguay as an example where we've worked. It's a small country, 3.5 million, but they joined us 2014, and they paid attention to, they got devices to 600 of their schools, actually more than that. And so they had the technology as a foundation. And then we advised them and worked with them for the last 6 years. How do you build the culture of learning in relation to the devices, and how does that lead to greater learning? If you take them now in 2020, I just saw a report the other day that said Uruguay is the only country in Latin America that has the technology system to actually leverage the opportunity now for greater learning for all, because they're linking the culture and the technology together. They did that by doing it. In other words, they developed that on purpose. So I'm saying to people, don't just think of the technology. And if you are seeing technology as a solution coming at you, and nobody has thought deeply about pedagogy and culture of learning for students and that, then, you know, yes, the front end investment of it is okay, but don't expect to go anywhere unless you're paying equal attention to what I call the culture of learning. And thirdly, make sure the system is not counter forces with the direction I just described. That system means culture at the local level, which hasn't happened yet. It means the middle level getting different, and it means pressure either on the policy level or policymakers who are now going to change differently and think differently because they know that it's not working, and that it has to be a system solution. So systemness, learning and well-being, and technology as synergized.
Okay, cool. So I'm just wondering how we get past this point, because obviously technologies like to sell kits because that's how they make their margins, and then sell software under software licenses. But this pedagogical element isn't something that seems to be easily available. And certainly I know, because we did some research, when we were looking at the back end for our system, and not many of the learning platforms are designed around learning. They're more designed around administration of teaching. And when we looked for AI in teaching and learning, we could find virtually no evidence of it whatsoever. It was all done through algorithms, and they were quite basic algorithms. And yet in other industries, obviously they're using highly technical tech to get them an awful long way. So how do we get the tech to be where we want it to be, as opposed to where it's offering to education?
Well, one way or the other, stop buying the wrong product. That would be one way of thinking about it. But not, you know, the schools that are successful in learning, the way I'm describing it, they have the same market facing them, but they will never buy something off the shelf that's a step-by-step solution, technologically based.
Yeah,
They're critical consumers of that, so they never do that, and they would instead work on the other part and use technology. And I think the market favors technology as a direct solution, because that's where the money is. You sell a bunch of them and you make your money. But it's significant that Microsoft asked us to do the reimagining paper, and we did it with them as our paper. But they knew what they were getting into when they asked us. We weren't going to write a paper pro technology only. And we have, if you just take some of the phrases in there, near the end when we're wrapping things up, we have a sentence that says that technology must be in the service of the twin pillars of humanity, which are human and social well-being. And that's what it says. It says that's where technology's role is, in the service of human development and social development. I mean, they can still do their technology, but they're not. It's not an accident that paper is appearing.
great.
And it's associated with Microsoft in this case. And I don't have any favorite preference for Microsoft. I mean, we are all kinds of technology connected to. But I have two things attitude about technology now. One is that to be a critical consumer, and second, to recognize that it's inevitable because it's got the power of the market, and the capitalization. And because it's inevitable and I'm a critical consumer, I'm going to look for the ways in which it can be in the service of human and social development. Explicitly, we have in our model a lot of attention we paid to how do you get precision without prescription? Or if another word for precision is specificity. How do you make sure that the solutions are specific? This is one reason, incidentally, why we talked earlier about the grammar of schooling and why the culture hasn't changed. One of the reasons it hasn't changed is the solutions were vague. You know, the good for the student, a human element. They were vague philosophical solutions quite often, right on the right track, but they were too vague to be picked up and understood. And now what we want to see is the specificity of the human and social development being much more clear and prominent. The specificity, and you can have specificity without imposition.
Yeah,
because most people will be attracted to specificity that works.
and I think that specificity is something we've got to work on. Just the term like learning. I know when I've used it in the past, it's kind of, you can get 98 different definitions from one staff group, and then it becomes very difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
How do we get into that? I'm just going to take you, because I'm conscious we're coming up towards the end of the hour, and I always thought you were the king of the pull-push. And I'm just wondering right now, what would you say to pull if I'm in leading, whether I'm system leading or whether I'm leading a school or whether I'm just leading learners, and what would you be pushing now?
Well, that's, in one way, the pushing part is our combination, I'll just stick with push, our combination of articulating the solution and partnering with others who are producing the solution on the ground. That is an actual system. So our push is to develop it, spread it, see it prominent, and have those that are advocating it be practitioners and students more than us, but as well as us. So that's the push. The pull, that's the positive push. I guess the other way, we're pushing against wrong drivers, wrong solutions. So at the same time that we're saying this is the way to go, we will say equally forcefully, this is wrong-headed. So we're pushing back against the wrong solutions that way. I think the pull is to have examples of this that people can move towards. And the good news is, because people have not been having a good time, I mean teachers and students, there are more prospects for pulling them towards good things than if they were doing okay. They're not doing okay. I mean, pre-COVID, and they're doing worse now in some pockets. So what's going wrong is so wrong that there's more opportunity where there's a push to something that's working, that more people will take it. And once they take it, there's contagion and positive movement. So I think I'll end with this by saying that I did another book called Freedom to Change 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, people push very hard against something. It's not working, we don't like it, etc. And then when that something kind of disappears or they get rid of it, they declare victory. We won. But that's not victory. That's only getting rid of what's not working. Real victory is creating what does work, which is the freedom to do something. So I think we're at a freedom to moment in time. And that is the freedom to do something that really works. And it's going to try massive effort at the bottom by people banding together to do that. Enabling from the middle, and a change of approach at the top of leadership, which will be the last part of that equation to change. But I'm predicting that there will be change over this next 10 years. Let's give it a wider berth. Over that time, all three of those levels will be affected, and it will cascade upwards, I think, to a certain extent, be recognized by those leaders who are seeing something good has happened and they latch onto it, and then help pull it forward even more, start to own it better. So this is a really huge time for education, something we haven't seen for 50 years since after the Second World War, where there's a real opportunity to do some good things.
Yeah, and I think that's going to involve gathering some evidence of what hasn't been working, which is going to be, as you say, come out there. Just to go on to leading, because obviously you've got a bit of experience in that. What I understood was that there's no leadership program in the world at the moment that can currently demonstrate its impact on learning. So I'm just wondering, where does that leave the state of leadership development now?
I know that's a very good question. I would say that our leadership work is built into the combination of things I talked about. It's not like a separate leadership program. So although in some ways, the one we're just doing now in Chile is there's a cohort of school leaders. There's cohorts of 20 or 25. So you have that. The design is that we're doing it online. It involves 8 sessions, 8 full days. And that each of these in the cohort, each of the subgroups have a coach or a tutor. We train the tutors to support, and we provide ideas. So our leadership program is in real time. These are leaders who are currently in the school position. So we want to develop their leadership on the job. It leads naturally to how do you develop leadership as a phenomenon. And I don't have a good answer to your question because I myself have not been gravitated towards leadership pipelines because I want to change the culture, and I don't think a pipeline changes the culture it's too slow. So I just don't. Let's leave it as some to be done combination of things. And I guess I would agree with you that the leadership programs per se are not adding up to much impact. So therefore, let's at least stop doing the wrong things or things that aren't working.
So get to the learning is what you're saying. Leaders become learners, learners as learners, teachers as learners, and we've got a chance to shift and open that paradigm. Yeah. Bravo.
Yeah, but I think we've the students as learners is phenomenal. We're saying the solution potential of students as learners, change makers, as combinations working with adults. It's really powerful. So that's the hopeful part.
Well, fantastic, Michael. I mean, it sounds like we've all got an awful lot of learning to do to move forward. We've reached the end of the hour. Just to say that we'll record this, and you'll get it passed out the next day, so everyone can see this, and Michael can sit there and say, "I shouldn't have said that," or "I'm glad," or "I should have emphasised that."
I know I'll say that, yeah.
But I think
second thoughts.
There's that superb paper to go to. There's your organisation to go to, and I will shamelessly add it right at the end on the slides because really, really important book in there. So if we leave that and just say thanks so much to everyone who's tuning in. If you've got more questions, just pass them through. There's the book, which a great read, fantastic stuff, and more detail. And I just love the way that's evolving as an organisation and evolving through yourself, Michael, and finding those golden threads that sit there between it. So massive thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. It's actually an exciting time, and I really always appreciate your involvement in doing this. I know we'll work some more together.
And thanks for everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. We're